Hi everyone, welcome to my channel or welcome back to my channel. My name is John and I am trying to review every single book that I've ever read, and I have some catching up to do. But let me talk about a book I think I finished in January. I read this with Brendan, my really good friend from the Historathon Discord group. I will try to leave the Historathon Discord information below. We both had our eyes on this. It is from Princeton University Press, and he bought a copy of it, and sometime in October or November, I sent him a box of books that I thought he would be interested in just from our conversations from a library book sale, the big library book sale that's relatively close to me. And as a part of a kind of return book package, he sent me this. This is by Zwolinski and John Tomasi, and this is The Individualists, Radicals, Reactionaries, and the Struggle for the Soul of Libertarianism. It comes out from Princeton, like I said, and he sent me this and a couple of other things. And we decided to read this pretty quickly, within a few weeks of when I got it. I want to say just a few words before I actually get into the meat of what I thought about the book. The following, what I'm going to say, is not an endorsement and it's not a refutation of any of the ideas found in the book. I really love and admire the mission of Princeton University Press, have loved dozens of their books, have reviewed dozens of their books on this channel, and I just want to share my enthusiasm for their work. I welcome comments and questions about the content of the book, but I am supremely uninterested in having debates about the various merits or demerits of libertarian ideas themselves. Okay? This comment section will not turn into a political debate. If you try to turn it into one, I will block you. Most people who comment on this channel on a regular basis, pretty much all of the people who comment on this channel on a regular basis, know what I'm talking about. If you are new, and if you're thinking about leaving a comment, please make it about something that you're curious about that is centered around the book, because I'm not going to tell you my opinions of the ideas themselves, separate from the book. I hope you understand I don't want it to turn into some sort of heated conversation over libertarianism. Okay, that aside. So this, just to show you the book for a third time, because that's necessary, right? This is The Individualists, Radicals, Reactionaries, and the Struggle for the Soul of Libertarianism by Zwolinski and John Tomasi. Came out from Princeton University Press, which I affectionately call PUP, in 2022. And it traces the intellectual history of libertarianism from its origins in the writings of John Locke, through the 19th century writers like John Stuart Mill, that is, all the way up through the current incarnation of the movement. For a history of ideas, their argument isn't surprising. Libertarianism isn't a monolith. We can think it is just by being caught up in the current political climate. The ideas in it have been contested and argued over for its entire history, and the more radical and emancipatory strains to the more markedly traditional strains, conservative ones, are all mixed in together in this book. No matter what you think of the current form of libertarianism as it happens to appear in late 20th, early 21st century American politics. So being an ever-evolving tradition that it is, libertarianism isn't a single issue stance either. The authors argue that 6 major issues actually inform where someone falls on kind of a libertarian spectrum. And those issues are private property rights, negative liberty, the sort of Isaiah Berlin's concept of negative liberty, individualism, free markets, skepticism about state authority, and spontaneous order, which, if you're new to that term, I was. Spontaneous order is the belief that economic and social order can occur spontaneously in the absence of centralized state authority. After a couple of introductory chapters that describe the history and inspirations for libertarianism, again, thinkers like John Locke, the classical liberal political philosophers that we all know of, the book devotes an entire chapter to each of those 6 subjects. If your familiarity with libertarianism is limited to the world of contemporary politics, the author's discussions about the internal contradictions and the multiplicity of thought within the movement about each one of those 6 topics will be interesting and surprising and illuminating. Without going into the weeds on each chapter, which I think would get boring, here are just a few examples of that complexity. Zwolinski and Tomasi's discussion of private property unravels 2 dominant strains within libertarianism. The Lockean assumption that private ownership is indisputable, and the more egalitarian one that says natural resources must be distributed in a way which respects fairness for all. And that second one, the egalitarian strain of libertarianism, is not one that we often associate with the word libertarian today, as we often see the people who wear that label, and when we see it in politics, we don't really think of that idea as being one of the most popular ones. But I said, these ideas were contested through its 200-year history, or 350 year if you want to go all the way back to John Locke. The authors argue libertarianism historically includes room for concern about the role of monopolies, the fairness of resource distribution, and debates on land value taxation. Ideas about state coercion are just as varied and complex, but begin with questioning the state's inherent authority and the assumption it has power by simple virtue of the fact that its members are elected government officials. Some theorists, like Benjamin Tucker and Lysander Spooner, suggest that documents like the U.S. Constitution lack true consent of citizens, since most people have never explicitly consented to them. No one has ever said, yes, I'm 18 years old, I'm now officially allowed to vote, and I consent to everything that the Constitution says. We just it's tacitly assumed of us that if we live in the United States and are a citizen, that we will abide by its rules. Others, like Robert Nozick, propose the idea of a minimal state, which is the idea that the only justified state action is to protect against infringements of property rights and the oversight of contract law. So there are some elements of libertarianism which are anarchical, and some which support the idea of a state, but it's very stripped down idea of a state. To use Robert Nozick's term, it's a minimal state. And maybe the most interesting chapter is on spontaneous order. Broadly, libertarians believe free markets provide the most effective way to build complex kinds of social coordination without the intervention of state action. Not only do markets arise voluntarily in the absence of state coercion, so they argue, but so do other communitarian-oriented benefits. Writers like Herbert Spencer and John Stuart Mill recognize this point while also arguing for a social duty towards the poor, which is, again, something else we don't often associate with contemporary libertarian thinking. The debate is not whether free markets are a good thing. That's nearly a universally accepted position within libertarianism, but rather whether the poor can best be helped through state intervention or through greater amounts of spontaneous order. Hopefully the big point in these 3 examples is clear. Libertarianism is, or at the very least, was a space for a diversity of ideas and policy proposals. The mix of subject and the fact that there is a university publisher here, Princeton University Press, may convince you this is a dry, actually, academic history, and it's really not. It is on the shorter side. It's around 300 pages. And if you're broadly interested in political philosophy and ideas and the history of those things, like I am, you'll find it pretty well written and approachable and engaging, with short chapters that focus on, like I said, each of the 6 issues that can place you somewhere along that libertarian spectrum. It is scholarly in depth and scope, with a very fair, diverse representation of most flavors of libertarianism that never sacrifices readability. It's kind of well written, I dare say. For most non-specialists, this will probably be the only general interest history of libertarianism you'll ever need. But this book is, like I said, relatively short, 300 pages, and it covers a wide array of ideas, so it will inevitably include certain things at the expense of others. Zwolinski and Tomasi share a distinct bias, it should say, and one that they're very forthright about in the book. They both support what they refer to as bleeding heart libertarianism, which is a movement that tries to marry the principles of libertarianism to concerns about widening social gaps and widening inequality gaps and problems about social justice, concerns about social justice. This is just one reason why they are less than thrilled with where American libertarianism has gone in the last generation, which is basically in the direction of a pretty traditionalist paleoconservatism. Think Pat Buchanan, if you can bring yourself to do so. Their biases also explain why certain influential names don't get the discussion time that some readers may think they deserve, most noticeably people like Hans Hermann Hoppe, the far-right anti-democracy author of the book. Seen it talked about in a few corners of the internet. It's called a Democracy, the God That Failed. But minor quibbles aside, I'd highly recommend this book for anyone who's interested in the subject, who likes political history, political philosophy, political thought, all of that good stuff. So, really, another wonderful book from Princeton University Press. Shouldn't be surprised there. The Individualists, Radicals, Reactionaries, and the Struggle for the Soul of Libertarianism by Matt Zwolinski and John Tomasi. I will see you next time. If you have any comments about the book and want, like I said, with the top of the video in mind, let me know. Be glad to answer them, or leave any questions you have. I'm always happy to answer comments. I just don't want the comments to turn into a free-for-all discussion about our political opinions. I will see everyone next time. Bye.